I'm going to talk a bit about the heart chakra, what it's like when it's opening, and also the perspective and spiritual development of the heart chakra. So, if you've been following along with some of my other videos, I've discussed the first, second, third chakras so far in terms of their stage of development, as well as their perspective on reality. And the reason that I'm putting this out is, first of all, some of you may not have seen those videos, but also because it is possible to have an individual chakra opening of the heart chakra without having the chakras or your lower chakras open. And so I point this out specifically for the heart as well as some of the other upper chakras because those chakras can open individually. But if the first three chakras do not open first, if the chakras do not open up in line with one another, they will still be subject to the wounding and the reality of the lower chakras. To put this more simply, somebody may have an open heart chakra. They may be a totally compassionate, loving person. They may also feel quite poorly about themselves in terms of self-esteem, self-worth. They may feel like a small child in an adult's body. They may dislike people. They may not connect with people very well. They may feel bitter and angry at the world, like the world is unfair, or they put things out into the world that are not received back by them, kind of that martyr syndrome. And so all of those things would indicate that there is a need to go back and work on the first three chakras so that the heart chakra can open in line with those, and also so that our heart chakra can open fully. So when the heart chakra opens up in line with all the other chakras, it is the fourth center to open up. I will be talking about this stage of awakening, this stage of opening in the heart, kind of like it is an ocean. For those who know me, they know that I love ocean metaphors, but it really does work here. So I'm going to be talking about surface level to deep or ocean floor considerations. And so I will be going from when the heart chakra opens, there's often a lot of pain and suffering and experiences of heartbreak, sadness that arise for people, all the way to working your way past that pain into the true perspective or possibility of the heart chakra. I will make a note here that I consider the heart to be the center of our being. And so, one way to really conceptualize what I'm talking about is that we can consider the heart chakra to be sort of a pivot point, or really the axis of our being. And so, the conceptualization of this would be that the lower three chakras can be considered a grouping together. They are a grouping of I, capital I. They're a grouping of our individual pain, of our suffering, of our ancestral, in utero, past life, all of that stuff that makes us feel unworthy, um, depressed, despairing, all of that really heavy, dense energy of the first three chakras kind of goes together because they are all about our personal stuff, our childhood, our victimhood, everything like that. Then we have the heart chakra, which is kind of the turning point or the axis point for our whole system. And it awakens in line but also it starts to move upwards as well. And so we can consider the upper three chakras to again be a grouping. They are a grouping of our understanding of our cosmic nature. Um, and so what's important about this is for the system that I am talking about, for the conceptualization that I'm talking about, is that for the heart to fully open, there needs to be an opening of the grouping of the lower chakras, as well as the opening of the upper three chakras. So what does that mean? It means that the heart chakra in perspective will open, and that we will go up to the throat and third eye and crown, and those will open as well. And then what will happen, what I consider to be the end of the spiritual awakening process, or the end or completion, full perspective on reality, full perspective of the chakra system, is to have what's known as the spiritual heart open. So again, a dropping after these chakras are open into the heart center and it opening more. Some people think that this is a false separation. And in some ways, I'd reply that everything is kind of a false separation. But the reason I'm separating things here is because the heart chakra does open. It does have a wonderful perspective to it. But when we go through the upper chakras, what can happen is that the larger heart, the spiritual heart, the sort of knot, or what's known as a bindu point in the heart, can then open fully. And so some people conceptualize this with all sorts of different nodes and knots and all that sort of stuff that happens when the whole chakra system is open and we go back down to the heart to rest in the heart state. So for simplicity, I will say that all of the chakras open up in line up to the crown. And then what happens, the completion of the process of the opening and activation of all of our chakras, is that there will be energy flowing into the spiritual heart. So we will be centered, the center of our being in the heart, as well as there's a point in the back of the head. Again, another bindu point. It is not the crown, it is here. This is truly where our cosmic eye sort of unfolds. So we will have energy gather here as well as the heart to complete the spiritual awakening or the opening of all of our chakras. So that is a completion point for everything. But let's take a big step back. We've gone through the first three chakras, and now the heart chakra is starting to open. Let's talk about those surface waves. And what happens when the first chakra starts to awaken? There's energy flow going to the heart chakra from the bottom up. Is that the pain that is there is felt? And so throughout the course of our lives, or maybe many lifetimes ancestrally, what has happened is that we've had very good reason to close down our hearts. People who we have loved have hurt us. And so what happens is that we put all sorts of armoring and boundaries and all sorts of things around our hearts. And we have also shut down our hearts and our capacity to love, our capacity to unconditionally love. I talked about this a bit with the second chakra, but what happens when we are conditionally loved? We are loved only if we act a certain way. We are loved only if we are good. We are loved only if we meet specific standards, or even we are loved, but we will be loved more if we go into this career, if we become this type of person, if we marry this type of person, if we adhere to the conditioning of culture and family and ancestry and society and all that sort of stuff is that we close down our own hearts in regard. We go from unconditionally loving beings to conditionally loving beings. And some of us have closed down and shut off to the extent that we cannot love at all, conditionally or unconditionally. So when the heart center starts to open, we become aware of the holding patterns we have there. We become aware of the armoring, the shielding, of the ways that we have shut our own hearts down against the world. And so that awareness can move us into healing, where we work on the patterns, we work on the ways that we have been harmed and hurt by the world. And so in earlier videos, I was talking about the chakra system and how they work in conjunction with one another. A somewhat simple way of looking at this is that the odd chakras work together. So 1, 3, 5, 7. Those are considered the masculine polarity chakras, the solar chakras, the chakras of doing, of organization. And then we have 2, 4, and 6, which are considered the feminine polarity chakras, or the chakras that are about feeling, intuition, and stillness. And so when the fourth chakra begins to open, a deeper level or layer of the second chakra can come up for healing. And so in the second chakra video, I talked about how we hold a lot of our childhood patterns there and patterns in terms of relating to other people. And so specifically, what comes up with the heart chakra is a lot of childhood stuff. It is any way that we have not been unconditionally loved by our parents comes up for healing. And in previous layers, previous chakras, there may have been a lot of anger and pain and suffering as a result of that. When the heart chakra begins to open in conjunction with the second, what happens is that that anger can turn to grief. There can be a recognition of our parents or guardians as human beings. And this is not a new age, oh, they tried their best and so we should forgive them sort of thing. I have talked about before, and I will always talk about that the way to let go of victimhood, the way to make our way through any pain we experience, is to fully experience it. It isn't to say, oh, have compassion for them and neglect your own feelings. No, it is to drop into those first 3 chakras and validate and confirm that everything you felt, everything you experience, everything that is still locked in your system deserves to be heard, deserves to be felt, deserves to experience that unearthing process where it can experience the light of day. And in that light of day, when those parts of ourselves that are angry and hurt, that felt dismissed, abandoned, rejected, can be seen, can be sat with, can be told, you deserve the right to feel exactly how you're feeling. That is when healing occurs. It is not by feeding ourselves sort of thoughts of, oh, you should be over your victimhood. How we get over our victimhood is by deeply feeling and acknowledging that we have been victimized, we have been harmed. So somebody traversing through that will typically feel a lot of anger, and they will also imagine their parents to be villains. What will also happen is that the negative aspects of childhood will be focused on the pain, the trauma, the experiences of feeling unloved, lesser than, invisible, all that sort of stuff. What happens when we rise to the consciousness of the heart is that we can recognize all of those things are true. But when we heal that victimhood and all of those dense energies that go with it, we could come to the level of grief. And this grief is what underlies a lot of our anger. And that grief typically is that we did not have the opportunity to have a childhood in which we were unconditionally loved. That grief is also the perspective of hopelessness. And this is going to sound strange to many of you, but the heart is our first step into spiritual adulthood. From here on out, we are spiritual adults and coming more and more into that place of spiritual adulthood developmentally. And part of that process of spiritual adulthood, at first, really stepping into that, is recognizing that your parents are people. Much like as a child, you likely couldn't imagine your teachers as people or other adults having people in private lives. You can recognize your parents as people. And more significantly, you can recognize that the parts of you still locked in lower levels of consciousness, so first three chakras, that are either stuck developmentally in childhood, waiting for the love and care and attention and affirmations that they never received, uh, that they are not going to receive them from their parents. And also from an adult perspective, from a heart-centered perspective, is letting go of the hope that your parents will be anything other than who they are. So there is a deep level of acceptance that happens here, and kind of oddly, it happens through letting go of hope of things with your parents being anything other than they were, anything other than they are. When we recognize this, we can shift into that spiritual adulthood in which we, as an adult, can offer the parts of ourselves, our inner children, that are developmentally stuck, waiting for parental love, waiting for unconditional love. We can offer that as an adult energetically to our inner children and heal considerable material in our first three chakras, because we have finally risen to a point where we recognize that our parents are not going to offer us that unconditional love. As an adult, you can let go of your childhood, and this is more firmly stepping into that heart perspective. Instead of having so much of our consciousness trapped in the past, trapped in the victimhood, the experiences of what we've experienced as a child, during development, as a teen, as 20s, depending on what age we are, I would say anything from a couple years back, going all the way to when we were born, is that parts of our consciousness linger there. And the most common reason that they linger there is that they did not receive the love, care, attention, affection, being seen and heard that they needed to. What happens when we really start to heal, when we really start to tend to our first three chakras and all of that material that is there, is that we start to spiritually move beyond our childhood into an adult present day state. We are no longer living out patterns from the past. We are no longer living out childhood wounding. We have healed and moved past that. For some of my clients, I talk about it like this. that it is not about erasing your past or not remembering it. It is more like if you are a character in a novel, your childhood at first might be an entire novel, or maybe a series of novels, depending. And what happens over time is that it becomes a book, is that it becomes a couple chapters, is that it becomes a single chapter, is that it becomes a paragraph. It has less weight, it has less pull over you, and gradually your childhood can be seen as some unfortunate things that have happened, um, but it can be let go of to move into that spiritual adulthood state. So we will know that we are in the spiritual heart when we start to see our childhood a bit differently. One of the things that happens when we have unresolved pain is that we really focus on that pain. When we go into a heart perspective, we can see the positive aspects too. And so I will say that occasionally there are outliers. I certainly have worked with people that have experienced deep childhood trauma where their parents were monsters, they were psychopaths, they were truly horrible, soulless human beings. Or beings that were, had a human suit. But for most of us, um, our parents in our childhood had a mix of good and bad, even if we suffered immense difficulty, even if we did not receive unconditional love. And that one of the things that happens as we go into spiritual adulthood, as that novel becomes a chapter, as it becomes a paragraph, is that we start to have positive memories, is that the good can emerge. When we are in our first three chakras, particularly when most of our energy is in our first two chakras, we will be immersed in negativity. The world is a horrible place. People are horrible. We look at ourselves and we just see the horror, the negativity, the complaints, the breaking down, the competitions. Um, that is our perspective on reality in the first three chakras. When we go into the heart chakra, that begins sort of the light of consciousness in which we can start to see the beauty and goodness of the world. And so, again, some people will have an individual heart awakening in which they can see that despite the trauma and stuff, that still is unresolved. And that is wonderful. Some other people will have a top-down awakening where maybe their crown or their third eye is awakened and their turn towards the light, turn towards positivity is that old expression, keeping your head in the clouds. They are not anchored in reality. They're not paying attention to reality. Just a mixed metaphor is they're keeping their heads in the sand. And that doesn't really allow for people to awaken. That just creates a lot of delusion and illusion for people. Um, in a kinder way, we can consider that to be kind of a coping strategy. And we can always consider within ourselves, if we're willing to, if our coping strategies are healthy, if they connect us, if they make us feel more alive, or if they disconnect us, or cause for us to hate or other people. So I will say that a fair amount of people come to me who really have experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of difficulties. And this is, in fact, what turned them towards God, what turns them towards spirituality. They were looking for a nurturing source. They couldn't find it in their childhood home, so they turned towards the divine. However, I also get a lot of people that come to me that say something like, you know what, my childhood wasn't too bad. There wasn't any form of abuse. I can remember good stuff. Why should I look at my childhood? Why should I look within? And so my answer to that is that if you truly were in a home where you felt complete unconditional love, that is truly wonderful, and you will likely not have as many barriers to your heart opening, to your second chakra, healing that deeper layer where we let go of our parents and our relationship with them and our childhood pain and wounds. However, we can have a healthy, what is considered a healthy childhood home in which emotional intelligence wasn't present. We weren't allowed to express ourselves, in which we felt pressure to be a specific way. We needed to kind of limit ourselves into what our parents' vision of who we would be would be. We felt the pressure to excel at school, to excel in particular ways. We felt confined to who we needed to be in order to be accepted and loved and to belong based off of our family, our ancestry, our ancestral line, our community, our culture, our school. All of these can teach us that we will only be loved and accepted if we act within certain parameters. That is not unconditional love. That is love, yes, but it is love with barriers. And so, even if somebody had an incredibly healthy childhood home, there can be a consideration of how that love was limited, how that love might have been conditional, and working past this. This especially happens in some of the higher chakras. But in my book, The Spiritual Awakening Guide, which is my first book, I talk about the conditioned layers of reality. And some of those conditioned layers of reality do not have to do with our childhood experience, our childhood pain and trauma. They have to do with things like the mythic layers of reality, certain archetypes we felt the need to move into, certain forms of spirituality, religious conditioning, the conditioning of our schools, what would make us an A student, that sort of stuff. And that is in some ways tricky to look at, but it is well worth looking at. On the deepest levels of second chakra healing in alignment with the fourth is this push-pull of belonging and standing out because we crave both. We crave a sense of belonging. We feel a deep fear biologically of not belonging because not so very long ago, not belonging would mean that we were cast out from our tribe, which would mean essentially death for most of us. So without recognizing it in our second chakra, what comes up at its deepest level is this fear of not belonging because our not belonging would mean death. And with awareness and healing, either with a spiritual healer like myself or anyone that's able to kind of guide you into that deep terrain, or some of you may be at the point of just meditating and considering that fear that is biological rather than makes sense in the present day. But we can recognize that in the present day, for most of us, um, we can recognize the parts of us that really desire to be along and belong and accept them and understand them and remove barriers that we may have that may be preventing us from belonging, preventing us from connecting. And we can also begin to release the fear by recognizing that it is not a present day fear. It is a biological fear. In order to heal the standing out thing, there can be a recognition that belonging and standing out are not opposites. This is what happens with our deeper conflicts, is that we can recognize that one isn't opposed to another. We can belong to our group, to the world, to people, and still be uniquely ourselves. And when we recognize that, that really fully heals the second chakra, and more energy can flow up to our heart, and we can do more work there. So let's pause for a moment and talk about energetics overall of the chakra system. I'm going to jokingly use what I call bad math here. And so that just means that I'm talking about estimates and for the purposes of example. Picture our chakras as, wheels, as energetic emanations. Sure. So each chakra is like an energetic emanation, both back and front, and just kind of like a sphere of energy in our midline. So we have all of these points or these spheres, first, second, third, fourth. But what connects these chakras is kind of like a river or a stream of energy. And so, what can happen when we open up our heart chakra is like that 5% of that stream may be there. And so, what does that mean? It means that 95% of that stream is still locked into the lower chakra. And I am introducing this concept now, even though some of you may be aware of it in terms of my talks on Kundalini awakening, um, because as we heal our lower three chakras, more and more of that flow could come into our heart chakra. And this is really significant because if we only have like 5% or 10% of that flow going into our heart chakra, it cannot move up further to the upper chakras. And so, what that means is that we need to go down and look at the first three chakras to see what is stuck there, what dense energy is still present there, what is unhealed there, in order for more energy flow to be available and to flow into our heart chakra. We do not need to be 100% in our heart chakra, have 100% of our energy there to flow upwards. But for the sake of example, I would say it would need to be 30, 40, 50%, something like that. Again, just a conceptualization, just a map. As a famous quote says, the map is not the terrain, in a lot of regards, but it can be really helpful to understand because some people are like, my heart chakra is opening, but I still feel abandoned and rejected and powerless, and I'm still engaged in spiritual competition and anger and all that stuff of the third chakra and the first and second chakra. I still feel like parts of myself are locked in childhood. And so, if we are willing to look at that first through third chakra stuff again and again, what happens is that more of our energy will rise to the heart chakra. For those of you who know me, I know that I have a background in psychology, mostly of my own accord, but it is a very active area of research and love of mine. And so one of my loves is Carl Rogers. He talked about having this capacity towards unconditional positive regard. And that is really what happens in the heart chakra, is that this unconditional positive regard for ourselves and for one another develops. So, how do we get there? We worked through the surface waves and some of the middle waves, basically the wounding of the heart, through all of that childhood stuff, through the grief that we've experienced. Again, that grief could be understood and felt and sat with until we recognize that we can put our childhoods away, that we can offer ourselves unconditional love and support that we didn't have as a child, and that we can look towards other sources of that support and love as an adult, ourselves, as well as other people, partners, friends, that sort of stuff that may already be in place. Or we may recognize in a heart chakra place that maybe we need to build those systems, those support with others. That isn't anything to admonish yourself for. It is a simple recognition that we all need social support, sources of love, sources of connection, and recognizing that and being willing to work on that being willing to work on your barriers towards that is a huge deal. When we start to move more and more into that heart perspective, in a lot of ways, it is such a shift in consciousness. It is, again, a huge leap in consciousness from the third chakra. I will say from the second to the third chakra is a huge leap in consciousness. From the third to the fourth chakra is a huge leap in consciousness. And then from the fourth to like the seventh is a huge leap in consciousness as well. This is because in the first three chakras, we are immersed in negativity, criticism, judgment of the world. When we go into the heart chakra, it is moving beyond our personal pain, moving beyond our personal story, our personal suffering, into the first stages of oneness. And so into that state that Carl Rogers calls unconditional positive regard. But from a heart perspective, it is much easier to see what we still have locked in the first three chakras, what we need to work on. This is because it's such a leap in consciousness and the perspective shift to a more positive view on reality. Um, and so, from that heart perspective, it is easy to see what we separate from, what we hate, who we other, who we dehumanize. In the third chakra, it's all about being angry at others, being in all those nonsense spiritual competitions, spiritual wars that they have with one another. Oh, this person is more enlightened than this one. This person is, this is the true path. Um, Lifestyle, diet, religion, spiritual path, all of these ways that we separate ourselves, that we attempt to be superior or inferior. We break through that more and more by going into oneness, more and more into a heart perspective, because so much of that is fueled by the pain of the first and second chakra, as well as through the anger and sort of nihilism of the third chakra, in which we need to engage in those competitions. From the fourth chakra, all of that sort of stuff begins to just look like separation. It begins to look like first chakra pain, the pain of feeling not good enough, not worthy enough, not lovable enough, not feeling that sense of unconditional love, feeling the need for hatred and separation and competition. So, as we go more and more into a heart chakra perspective, it is the first stage of oneness, which is the capacity to see yourself in each person that you meet. And instead of there being separation, hatred, othering, projecting our own unowned stuff onto other people, it is seeing aspects of our own humanity in another person. And this is how we can meet people with compassion, with respect, with that unconditional positive regard. And people truly feel that. People are aware when you look down on them, when you look at people with contempt, when you look at them with hatred, when you look at them with anger and separation. The heart perspective is very much a perspective of we are both human beings. And so when you have that perspective, you can truly sit with another person's pain or their victimhood or whatever suffering they're experiencing with the understanding of, you are angry. I too have known anger. You have experienced this. I haven't experienced something exactly like that, but I surely know sorrow. I surely know what it feels like to not belong. I surely know what it feels like to be in a state of suffering or sickness. And so we start to see ourselves reflected in one another rather than separation there. And that ability to start to see yourselves in each person that you meet starts to resolve a lot of the first three chakra stuff pretty quickly. Because what happens is that when you meet somebody that you still want to be in competition with, that you feel contempt for, that you feel angry towards, that you hate, that you other, is that you can recognize that that is not coming from a heart perspective, is coming somewhere from the first three chakras. And if you are willing to look towards that, there can be an immense amount of healing there. For those of you that want to go to such depths, I suggest my work, my latest book, Shadow Work for the Soul, because it will teach you everything you want to know about how to get to that point of seeing your projections and reclaiming them from other people. So much of the hate and othering, and even on a spiritual level, the wars and all the politics and politicians and, um, you know, uh, public figures, they are all manifestations of our own unowned shadow, our own self-hatred, our own othering, all that sort of stuff. So I will say a few caveats here. There are people that are immensely locked in their first three chakras because they believe that their diet, lifestyle, religion, spirituality, whatever they're doing with themselves is superior and everyone else is other. Everyone else is to be treated with arrogance, contempt, competition. This happens a lot in cults and groups, as well, even from a positive capacity. We are the group that is going to be enlightened. We are the spiritual path. Only you follow our spiritual path. We are superior. We are the only ones that will lead you to the promised land, so to speak. From a heart perspective, we can see how illusory that is. I will share that from a heart perspective. What you will recognize, and I'll specifically talk about spirituality, even though we can, talk about diet and lifestyle and all this sort of stuff, is that you can sense that, there are, for example, certain spiritual paths that are quite predatory. There are spiritual paths that are meant for people to be exactly where they are. There are spiritual paths that are meant to be, the opiate for the masses to keep people sort of chasing their tail. And that old, tired, cliche about the mountain, there are a lot of spiritual paths that just keep people sort of running around the base. Some people may feel an immense amount of grief here when they move from the anger of the third and contempt and arrogance and competition of the third chakra into the fourth chakra, because you start to see all of that as a tremendous amount of suffering, a tremendous amount of ignorance. And the first reaction to that beyond anger is typically grief. Some people do not go into this stage of grief, but a lot of people do. But the perspective beyond that grief is understanding that people will find what they're looking for, that there are many different lifestyles, many different spiritual paths, and the ones that are not meant to lock people into illusion are the ones that all point to different manifestations of the divine. Are there paths that lead more directly there? Sure. Um, but if we consider that every spirituality is sort of, that old, finger pointing at the same sort of location, just in different ways, we can start to move out of this separation and the last stages of kind of third chakra stuff where we feel in competition and separation and announce we're superior than another person because we eat this or drink this or don't drink this or don't eat this or follow this path and don't follow this path, into that respect and regard for every layer of spirituality. I will share personally that this was the level that I got to when I moved from not understanding why people didn't see the illusion and like kind of a lot of these spiritual paths and anger about it and wanting to point it out all the time, to truly understanding that people find what they are looking for. If somebody is looking for truth, if somebody is looking for something deeper, more healed, more true, more aware, they will find it. They will do the work. They will put in the legwork to find it. It is just that, the spiritualities, the things coming from the first chakra perspective that are like gain enlightenment in 5 minutes, those will always be more popular because that is where more people are. Um, so really going into this heart chakra perspective is understanding the layers of reality and feeling compassion for where people are, understanding where people are. I will say that a lot of people think of compassion about doing what the other person likes, basically being a doormat. That is not what compassion from a heart perspective is at all. In some ways, this is more of kind of a Jesus-y, they know not what they do. If you have the perspective of the heart, you can look at somebody that is in immense suffering, that is locked in the first chakra, for example, and you can recognize that whatever they have going on, their abandonment wound, um, their illusion, their delusion, their suffering, that they are totally locked in there, and that they are living that out on a daily basis. They need to live with that. I may come across somebody that is immensely suffering for a moment, or maybe for a couple of moments. They are living out that suffering day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute. And in recognizing that, a lot of compassion can grow. And this is not a compassion of looking down at them. This is a heart-centered compassion of recognizing their suffering, recognizing how much that they suffer, and being able to sit with that, being able to accept people for who they are and where they are without a desire to change them. That desire to change people is very kind of third chakra-y. The heart chakra can be considered radical acceptance, which is accepting people, loving people, unconditional positive regard for people for where they are. Some people in this world may be locked in the first chakra and they want to remain in that infantile or toddler state for the rest of their lives. Some people locked in that state may want to come into spiritual adulthood. From a heart perspective, you can see both and not resent, hate, feel anger or separation towards anyone because it is their stuff. It is not yours. A really good example of this, of what compassion is a scenario I've worked with plenty of time with clients. Let's say a parent has an addict as a child. That child will think that compassion from that parent is giving them money, letting them into the house to rob them blind, to fuel their addiction. What true compassion would be is that parent no longer enabling the child, that parent offering limits and boundaries for that child, that parent understanding that compassion doesn't mean that they have to be a doormat, that compassion doesn't mean that they cannot have boundaries. We can love somebody truly and wholly. We can love even the person that is in the depths of like first chakra locked in narcissism, where they see everybody just as an extension of themselves. They cannot consider anybody else's point of view. We can see them and feel unconditional love for them, as well as not accept their behavior, have boundaries and limits and conditions. One of the things that always comes up for people is that this idea of paradox of tolerance. It's a big concept, but one of the things that this that the paradox of tolerance suggests is that we can accept so much within people, but there comes a certain point of intolerance that other people have, that hatred, self-loathing pointed outward, that we should not tolerate. If we consider this as a social contract, as a way to achieve more harmony, peace, fairness, justice in our world, there is a certain tipping point in which we should not be tolerant of intolerance. And so, what does this mean from a heart perspective? It means that I can meet somebody and deeply understand their perspective and still think that they're psychotic, that they're delusional, that they are completely unhealed, that they are unclear, that they are filled with hate. One of the interesting things that happened when I moved more into my heart chakra, and this happens to so many people I've worked with, is that they will start to experience peace and equanimity with everyone they meet. Except more extreme people will start coming into their lives to show them where they do not have peace, where they cannot show acceptance, where I cannot see myself in that other person, where there is still division in the heart. And so it was interesting at this point in my career to get all sorts of misogynists and all the isms and ableism and racism. And, especially for me, I get a lot of people that are locked in misogyny in varying ways as a female spiritual teacher. Um, and one of the things I recognized is that the more and more I could sit with unconditional positive regard with people, the more I can let go of their behaviors and not take them personally, the more I could offer acceptance to them, which was immensely healing for them because they were no longer being infantilized. They were no longer being looked down on. They were no longer being looked at with contempt. They were being given unconditional positive regard, but also there was questioning of, hey, why is this hatred there? Why is this separation there? Why is this belief system there? So, a couple more things to share. With the heart chakra, one of the things that people come across is this idea of transactional love. It's part of conditional love. But they come across this belief that, or understanding that they love others as much as they are loved in return. And this is transactional love. This is the idea that I will offer 5 cubic meters of love and you will offer 5 cubic meters of love. And if you only offer 3, then I'm only going to offer 3. And this is a defense and an understandable one by the heart. As we go deeper and deeper to that ocean floor of the spiritual heart opening, there can be a recognition that it feels good to love, that it feels good to move beyond transactional, conditional love and simply love because we desire to, that it feels good to offer love, offer that unconditional positive regard, offer ourselves to people, even if they are not able to offer it in return. And this recognition, this realization really opens the heart chakra wide because you can recognize that people locked in suffering are not able to offer that love. But why should that prohibit you from offering unconditional love? The baseline of our beings truly is love. And so, one of the things that I share with people is that the more and more we go into our heart space, the more we can offer love, the more we can go to a place of immense stillness within ourselves. The most profoundly realized people that I know, that I have met, that I've experienced within myself, it is a place of immense stillness. And that baseline of our being is a cosmic, vibration. If I were to be, you know, um, I'll talk about this more with a spiritual heart, but is that, kind of pulsation that radiates from a space of love. And from there, everything else is division, everything else is separation. I will say that some other recognitions that people have when they move into their heart chakra from that perspective is recognizing, again, working with that second chakra of connecting to people, is that the barriers they have put on themselves against vulnerability. What happens when we are vulnerable with the wrong people is that they use those vulnerabilities against us. What happens when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and authentic in a way that is coming from an adult space is that somebody saying, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, you are this, you are that, is that you can say from that spiritual adult place, yes, I am. I can certainly be a bit grouchy sometimes, or whatever their thought is. I can certainly be a jerk sometimes, or whatever their conceptualization of you is. People ask me a lot of times about defense, and that really is one of the best defenses, is accepting all aspects of ourselves. Because then if somebody calls you something in contempt and arrogance in a way to put you down, to harm you, um, to, take out their pain on you, you can just be like, okay. And all of that pain reverts back to them because you are not accepting it. You are not harmed by it. Um, the best defense in the heart is that if you do not accept other people's energies, they revert back to them. If you recognize people clearly as suffering, as immersed in their suffering and trying to project it, trying to displace it or put it onto you, or whatever they are doing with their pain and suffering and unknown stuff, you can recognize that it is simply their stuff, to not take it personally. And in doing so, you do not accept it, and that energy reverts back to them. I will share one last thing about the heart, and it is very important, is that our ability to connect to people is through intimacy. And how that intimacy is in the second chakra is through, sexual openness. How it is through the heart chakra is emotional openness. It is sharing of ourselves, of our vulnerabilities. Nobody wants us to be perfect. How we share is through sharing our suffering, sharing our vulnerabilities, sharing our struggles, sharing the deepest aspects of who we are with people. And so the heart truly opening, we can move forward with genuinely just simply being human and recognizing that we do not need to be perfect. The first three chakras, we are looking for a perfected self. We are looking for health and wealth. And the idea, if we're only going to be spiritual enough, we will not be human. We will be superior. We will be above everybody else, all of that sort of stuff. In the heart chakra, we recognize that we can simply be who we are, offer ourselves that unconditional positive regard, um, simply as who we are. And in recognizing that, we can open our heart chakra more and more, come into that perspective more and more, and we will notice our lives, our bodies, our heart, our soul starting to shift to that more positive place of seeing the beauty and goodness of ourselves, of the world, of other people, than being so stuck in the first three chakras, that dense negativity, passing around trauma and pain and suffering.